Alhamdulillah. So before I begin today's talk or today's ta'lim, I just want to ask you guys one question. What do you think is the largest growing belief in the world today?
Largest growing belief?
Yes, the fastest growing belief in the world today.
Al-Islam.
Al-Islam? Does everybody agree with that? Okay. Now this is true that Islam, of course, is the fastest growing religion in the world. But another fast growing belief is atheism and agnosticism. The belief either there is no God or that God may or may not exist and that we cannot know his nature or his attributes. Especially in the Western world, this is the most, or one of the most fastest growing religions or beliefs in the world. Atheists will say that their belief is not a religion. And this is because of several reasons. First of all, the secularization of society, society's moving away towards God and towards religiosity and focusing more upon their individual needs, the individual wants, right? It's called individualism, right? So that's one reason. But another reason is, and this is what I believe is a part of the case, is our own lack of conviction sometimes in giving like arguments for God's existence, and our lack of, I'd say, confidence in it. Many times people, believers, mostly Christians say this, but even some Muslims, they say this, that our belief in God is based purely on faith. It's based purely on trust. It's not based on any type of reasoning or any type of logical deduction, right? Now, this is not how Muslims in the past thought at all. Muslims knew that even though we have something in Islam called the fitrah meaning the natural inclination to believe in God and the natural inclination to do what is right and to do what is wrong, they knew that this was based not just on our own whims, our own desires, our own flawed intuition, but based on aql. Aql meaning reasoning and logic as well. So I want to ask you guys real quick, what are some, just really quickly, from the top of your mind, what are the reasons you believe that there's a God, or that you know there is a God? What are some things in your mind that confirm to you that God exists, and that atheism could not be possible? I want to make it a bit interactive.
The creation of man himself, his mind, his all of the systems in his body, respiratory system, digestive, everything about us is a miracle.
That's a good answer. Anything else?
Universe.
What about the universe?
The existence of the universe had to be created by somebody.
Now, what if the atheist says that, oh, the universe is just a fact? It's just here. There's no cause for it.
Me?
Yeah, I'm asking you, yeah.
If there's no cause for it, I would say, do we know of anything that has no cause?
Right. Anything else?
Answer. I know this is God because first thing, we look at ourselves first. Look at yourself, then look at the universe. If they see already everything that's made in this planet here, not other planets, you really have one God. That's all. Out there we just one good thing. That's why we praise him for his most mercy to us.
Right.
Righteousness.
Exactly. So there's a misconception that the Quran, and I've heard some people say this, some da'is, some people who give da'wah, they say this. They say that the Quran doesn't acknowledge atheists, or that it doesn't talk about atheism. Now, of course, the main subject in the Quran that it talks about is shirk, or kufr, or polytheism, believing in more than one God besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is true, because this is what the most abundant belief is, or the most common belief is amongst people throughout history. Throughout most societies, they were polytheistic. So of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala focused mainly on this, because this is more common. Atheism throughout history, and even now, despite atheism growing, it is still a minority belief among people. Most people believe in some type of God or gods of some kind, right? Because that's what we're naturally inclined to believe in, that there's something beyond ourselves. Nonetheless, the Quran, interestingly enough, does tackle atheism. There's one ayah, the Arabic loses my mind, or it's outside my mind right now, But basically, what it says is that there are people in the time of the Prophet ﷺ who said that we live and we die, and nothing kills us except for time, ad-dahr, right? There's no purpose beyond this of this life. There's nothing that created us, nothing sustains us. We just live and we die, and that's it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to these people who believe in this in Surah At-Tur, in ayah, I believe, 35, where he asks the question, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ, which means, are you, or did they create themselves, or were they created from nothing? Sorry, it says, were they created from nothing? أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ means from nothing, no thing at all. أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ, or are they themselves the creators of themselves? Now, the first one we know is obviously impossible, right? Something that is nothing, no thing, is the absence of a thing. If there's no thing, then it can't cause anything, right? The absence of things can't cause anything. The second one is أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ, or are they themselves the creators, right? Now, this is also impossible because, as we know, if you exist, in order for you to do something, you have to exist, right? If you make yourself exist, then you have to be in a state of existing and not existing at the same time, which is absolutely absurd, and no one would dare to give such a proposition. So I want to go into, and this is enough for most people to realize that there is a God, right? But I want to go into the presumption, or the presumption of this ayah. This ayah, it hits at a core intuition that we as human beings have, right? Because an atheist might look at this and say, oh, it's saying khalaq, created, right? And it's assuming that we're created. Why is it assuming that we're created? There's a reason why. It's because we as human beings know intuitively that our existence and the existence of everything around us is not necessary. It didn't have to be that way. I could have easily not existed. So the scholars of Islam, after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's death, they encountered many groups of people as they spread around the world. They encountered people, for example, who were into Greek philosophy. So they would say things like the universe has always existed, and it never was the case that it didn't exist. Or they would read works from atheists, because atheists, like I said, they did exist at the time, saying things about how God doesn't exist, right? And how the universe is called a brute fact, something called a brute fact, meaning that it just is the way it is. We have no explanation for why it is the way it is, right? And so what these scholars did, these Muslim scholars, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them and raise their ranks, they explained further this ayah using logical deductive arguments. A deductive argument meaning an argument that uses general propositions or general statements to come to a specific conclusion, and it gives a 100% certain guaranteed result. Meaning, if you give this argument and the premises are true, then the conclusion is 100% true. By necessity, it cannot be false. So before I get into the argument itself, I want to break down some of the terms that this argument uses. So it first is, it bases the fact that everything we see and everything that is a thing is in one of three categories. It is either necessary, or it is contingent, or another word for contingent is possible, or it is impossible. Now, what does that mean? So I'll use the example of truth statements. So a necessary statement, or a statement that is necessarily true, is that 2 + 2 = 4. Could 2 + 2 = 4 ever be false? Ever? No. Is it possible that 2 + 2 can equal 5, or 3, or 100? No. It is necessarily true. Necessary meaning that it is the way it is by necessity, and it could never change or be different at all. It is not conditioned by anything else. A contingently true statement, or a possibly true statement, is a statement that could be true, or it could be false. Or if it is true, it could have been false. So for example, I exist. Ismael Saleem, he exists right now. This statement is true, but is it true by necessity? No. because you can imagine logically that I couldn't have existed. Now, the reason why I exist and why I don't not exist is because there are certain conditions that make me exist, right? Another example would be the United States is majority white, right? Is this true by necessity or is it true contingently? It's true contingently, because if the circumstances of the world were another way, then the Native Americans would still be here, right? It's not true by necessity. I hope that makes sense. If there's anything that, because this is a bit philosophical, obviously. If there's anything that is confusing or you want me to explain, I'll be happy to do so. And then the third is impossible. This is basically self-explanatory. Something like a squared circle. Can there be an object that has sides and doesn't have sides at the same time? No, it's impossible. Can 2 plus 2 equal 5? No, because 2 plus 2 by necessity means 4. So if it's 5, that's impossible, right? So we don't have to go into that. So that's what necessary, contingent, and impossible are. In Arabic, it is wajib, same thing, same word we use for our obligatory actions, right? Like our salah is wajib. Wajib here means necessary. It has to be that way. Mumkin is contingent. Mumkin literally means possible. Means it could be one way or another way. And then muhal is impossible, right? So now how does this relate to the existence of God? Now when it comes to existence, meaning things that are real, things that exist, things that are here, when we observe everything around us, right? Everything we see in the universe is contingent. It exists contingently. What does that mean? Like I said, I gave the example of myself. I exist now, alhamdulillah. I could have not existed. If my two lovely parents never met, I wouldn't have existed, right? This masjid is contingent, right? If the people who built this masjid didn't exist, then this masjid wouldn't exist. Not only that, if the material used to build this masjid didn't exist, this masjid wouldn't exist. This argument depends more on, or it relies more on dependency than causation itself. It includes causation, causing something, but it also includes sustained dependency. So for example, a tree. What does a tree depend on to exist? It depends on the seed existing first, that it comes from, then the change that happens within that seed, and then once the tree grows, right, it depends on sunlight, it depends on water, it depends on the soil, it depends on all of these things, correct? Everything in the universe is like that. Everything we know is like that. And even us as humans intuitively know that. That's why we ask things like, where did such and such come from? That's why we have science. Because we know intuitively that the things around us are a certain way because of prior conditions, right? And that they could have been another way. Why is the sun shining and not another way? Why is the sun there and not another way, right? That's why we study science, because we know, and this is how I like to put it, that things, everything around us is the way it is based on conditions. So necessary, this is how I like to put it, means unconditional. It is the way it is unconditionally. Contingent is things that are the way they are conditionally, right? So everything around us exists conditionally. Nothing exists by itself just because it is the way it is. Nothing. Not a single thing, right? Now that we know that, we have the universe. The universe is a sum of everything observable that we can see, right? The whole thing is contingent then, right? The planets are contingent, right? The planets didn't have to exist. If they didn't exist, there would be no contradiction or any type of logical problem, right? It's not like a squared circle where it can't exist, it's impossible. So if the planets are possible, meaning they could have not existed. If I am possible, meaning I could have not existed. If the stars are possible, meaning they could have not existed. If all these things are like that, then so is the universe. So the universe could have existed or could have not existed, but it exists. Now, if the universe could have not existed, right, and everything in it could have not existed, and it depends on something else to sustain its own existence, what is the nature of that thing? Is it dependent or is it independent? If it's dependent, then it's in the same category as everything else that's dependent and needs something else to explain it, right? If it's independent, then what's the nature of this independent thing? First of all, it's already, you're already proving the point if you say that it's independent, right? That's already showing that there's some kind of God or some type of ultimate power, right? So in reality, there cannot be a state of affairs in which every single thing around us is contingent or conditional or possible. It cannot exist, or dependent. If everything around us is dependent, then it wouldn't exist. There has to be something that explains everything else, that is outside the set or the collection of dependent things. So now we say, okay, there's something necessary, meaning that it has to be there. It was always there, it has to be there, and it's impossible for it not to be there, right? And this thing is the condition for which all other things exist. So what's the nature of this necessary existence, is what they call it. They call it, the necessary existence, or al-wajib, right? Al-wajib al-wujud is what it's called in Arabic. So what's the nature of this thing, right? Because me proving that there's a necessary existence, the atheist might say, oh, well, that doesn't prove that there's a God. And keep in mind, this argument is very philosophical in a way, yes, and it's very logical, but this is the assumptions that we have to know that there's a God. This is how we know that there is a God. All of our assumptions, like for example, when we say, the atheist comes to us and he says, how do you know there's a God? And then we say, oh, well, where did everything else come from? This is why we say that. The atheist might say, oh, well, that's not a good argument. No, it is. Because this is fundamentally what we as human beings know to be true. We know that everything around us is dependent, conditional, didn't have to be the way it is, right? So going back to the necessary being, the wajib al-wujud. So number one, this thing has to be extremely powerful, this existence. Not only does it have to be extremely powerful, it has to be all powerful, because it is responsible for the existence and the sustenance of everything around it, or everything else that exists, right? It can't be kind of powerful, a little bit powerful. It has to be all powerful. That's number one. Number two, it has to be eternal. Because if it's not eternal, then it's not necessary. It's not independent, right? Number three, this being has to have some type of a will, meaning ikhtiyar in Arabic, choice. Now, why do I say that? If, let's take me, for example. My existence is conditional. I could have existed, I could have not existed, right? Everything around us is contingent. Everything around us is possible. It could have been that way, or it could have been another way. If everything is conditioned upon this one independent source, this independent source chose to make the universe one way over another. So, again, take me for example. This thing that is responsible for everything else to exist, right? It chose that I'm going to exist over not existing. It has to have chose that. Because if both are equally possible, there has to be some type of choice involved. It can't be random. Or the existence of Earth. Earth is contingent. It didn't have to exist. So something, this independent source, chose from between the Earth existing and the Earth not existing. It chose. Now, if it chose, then that means it has some type of knowledge. You can't make a choice if you have no knowledge or you have no consciousness. Something that is unconscious cannot choose anything, right? So it has consciousness. And if it has consciousness, then it has knowledge. And if it has knowledge, and it has knowledge of itself, number one, and knowledge of what it created, or what it sustains, and what it didn't choose, and what it didn't create, essentially this thing has all knowledge that can be had. It knows about itself, it knows about what it created, it knows about what it didn't create, right? What it chose to create over other things. So this being, has knowledge. So it's eternal, number one, independent, number two, it has a will, it has knowledge, and another thing that it has is that it is unlike everything else in the universe. How do we know that? Because like I said, if this being is like everything else in the universe, it's also dependent. It's in the collection of all dependent, possible, changing things. But it's not in that set. It's something outside of it. So if it's outside of it, then it's nothing like anything in the universe, right? And we know that it's independent, like I said, and that everything else depends on it. And we also know that this thing is one because, like we said, it has a will. Now, if there was two ultimate existences, necessary existences, that had well, I'm not going to say 3, 4, 5, just 2. If 2 of them had an ultimate will, and their will was imposed upon the universe, and this argument is from the Quran, if 2 of them existed, and they both had an ultimate will, right? Let's say one chooses for me to exist. The other one chooses for me not to exist. Which one is going to get their way? If there was 2 of them, and they had both independent wills, then the universe would be in chaos. One would choose one thing, the other would choose the other thing. They would be stripping each other of power. But that's not what we observe. We observe the universe has uniformity, right? That it has this like natural law that is consistent within the universe. No law of the universe or no law of physics or anything contradict one another. The laws that govern the sea are the same as the laws that govern the land. They don't contradict each other, right? So this thing has to be one. So what does it sound like to you? A being that's one, a being that's independent and everything else depends on it, a being that is eternal and not created, and a being that is unlike all other things. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Say Allah is one. Allahu samad. A samad meaning that Allah is independent and everything depends on Him. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He begets not, nor is He begotten. He wasn't started, He was eternal. Wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. And nothing is like Him. So this is the argument that Muslim scholars have used throughout history to prove that God exists. It's something that I've been studying and looking at a lot recently, and I think it's very interesting. And I just wanted to share it with you all. We all, of course, know that Allah exists. But I think this is a very interesting argument because it taps into intuitions that we know, or self-evident truths that we know. And I think that we should, at least some of us, should look more into this. Because actually what Islamic scholars say is that the study of this field, studying like deep questions like this, is fard kifaya, or wajib kifaya. So there's 2 types of fard or wajib. There's a fard that is for everyone, fard ayn. Every single person has to do it. Can you give me an example of something that's fard ayn that every single Muslim has to do? Salat, fasting, if you're able, hajj, etc. It's an individual obligation for everyone. But studying these fields is fard kifaya, meaning that someone in the community has to do it. Not everyone has to do it, because obviously these are very deep topics to think about, but it's something important because, especially now in America, because we have so many opposing ideologies around us, so many people claiming atheism, claiming agnosticism, challenging Islam, challenging the Quran, challenging the belief in God in general. When the belief in God is a self-evident truth, it has to be true. Any other alternative is impossible. Any alternative where there's a universe and there is no God is impossible. There must be a God. And I think this is something that's very important for us to be confident about. Because the atheist thinks that, his position and the theistic position, that there is a God, are on equal footing. They think that, my position, I have some questions that I can't answer, but so does the theist. No, the theist, his position is completely logical, completely rational, and it is the only rational explanation, even outside of a religion. Let's say you don't want to say it's Islam or Christianity or whatever. Regardless, there is a God, 100%, beyond a shadow of a doubt. So that's all I wanted to say. I thought it was a very good argument. I thought it was a very interesting topic. I just wanted to bring it up, see what you guys thought. Any questions? Because like I said, it's a deep topic. And there's a lot of terms that might be new to many of us. It was new to me. It took me a while to delve into it and learn it. So anything? Any questions? Comments?
You have any questions?
That's a very good presentation. Shukran.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was very short and concise. I wanted to commend you on it because it took me about an hour and a half to say what you said in about 25 minutes. So I was having the same Talim at Harrisonburg on a similar topic, and he's put it very concisely. Alhamdulillah. I also thought it was the contingency was a very good argument, and the continued sustaining is very important.
Yes.
Because deists would say, well, what about if God created the universe and left it on its own, and He doesn't care about what He made? Maybe He made it on accident, and then it just started through time forming into what it is. the theist says that Allah or God is still active in the world.
Right.
So that you discuss the sustainability of it, that it's still being sustained and it's necessary, is very important. That word necessary is very important, period, in the argument.
Exactly. So the arguments about, God being it's called in philosophy, efficient cause. That means basically that it's the cause outside of the thing. So for example, my mom, may Allah bless her, is the efficient cause of me, right? But an efficient cause, it can create something or cause something and then leave it. That thing doesn't rely on it for its sustained existence. Now, Muslim scholars also made another argument. It's very famous now. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument, used by a Christian named William Lane Craig. His version of the argument is not as good, to be honest, as the Muslim one, of course. But this argument was used for a very specific reason, to prove that the universe is what they call hadith, meaning it has a beginning. Now, the reason they made that argument is because there were Muslims at the time who were heavily delving into Greek philosophy, like Aristotelian or Aristotle's philosophy. Aristotle believed that there is something like a God somewhere, maybe, but the universe is eternal, that it never began. And so obviously for Muslims, this is a bid'i or a innovated belief. This is a wrong belief to have, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He is the khaliq of as-samawati wal ard. He created the heavens and the earth. And that the heavens and the earth were nothing, and then Allah created them. So they were using that argument mainly against Muslims, to be honest. It's called Burhan al-Huduth, the argument from the beginning of things, or the argument from things changing or beginning, right? They're using it against Muslims, like Ibn Sina, for example, which, funnily enough, Ibn Sina actually used the argument that I just gave, but it goes against him also. But anyways, but the argument that I was using, this is preferred by a lot of Islamic scholars because it not only proves that the universe had a beginning and that something caused it, but that this thing that caused the universe also sustains it, and it makes choices because, like I said, everything is possible, right? Things could be one way and they're not that way. Why? Because that thing chose for it to be that way, right? And it goes into a lot of other things. But this is like the main argument that Muslims use. Because also it ties into that verse, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ, right? That Allah created everything, right? And that it couldn't be any other way. It shows that it can't be the case that things are just self-sustaining. It can't be that way. Everything is sustained by Allah, by something else outside of the universe. But yeah, I went to a bit of a tangent. But yeah.
All right, I appreciate it very much. We're about to get started on this next thing, but alhamdulillah. I gotta talk to you some